Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session on writing a research proposal. My name is Dr. Adam Fishwick. I'm the Faculty Head of Research Students in Business and Law, and I'm looking forward to meeting a few of you in the one-to-one sessions later on. I'm very pleased to introduce our colleague here, Professor Rachel Granger. Rachel is a Professor of Urban Economies in the Faculty of Business and Law, and is also one of our AHRC Midlands 4 Cities site directors. She today will be talking to you about her extensive experience looking at high quality competitive research proposals, giving you some of the important tips and tricks as you develop your own. I'll step away now, hand over to Rachel, but I'll join you again in the Q&A session at the end.
Okay, thanks Adam. I think that was a bit of a generous introduction, to be honest. But I will just explain that my role here at Montfort University is as a site director for the Midlands 4 Cities Doctoral Training Partnership, and because of that, I get this fantastic pleasure to read upwards of about 250 PhD proposals each year across a number of disciplines. And it's absolutely fantastic. And I've learned quite a lot from that. And hopefully in this session, I'm going to impart some of that on you, some little tricks, as Adam referred to. So I'm often asked, what's the first thing you do if you want to prepare a research proposal? And my advice is always this: before you do anything, spend time thinking through the logics of your proposal. Think about the what, the why, the where, the how, because those very simple things are going to give you the structure that you need to write it and to write the proposal. And there's often an internal logic to your topic, and if you follow those 4 words, you will get you won't get the final structure, but it will be a really good starting point for starting to put some meat on the bones and to start developing that, hopefully with other people. And I think only once you've really thought through those 4 dimensions, you can begin to write the title. How many times have I seen people write a really complex title, and then the proposal that's detailed doesn't really bear any resemblance to the title? So I'd encourage you to do it the other way. Add the title, just like an essay, add the title right at the end, or add the introduction to the end, because that's when you really know what you want to try and sell. The other little tip that I tell everybody actually is, somebody once told me this when I was doing my PhD, that your concentration levels at the point at which you read something or you listen to something is very high at the start, but it's like a U-curve, so it drops very quickly. So the key thing is the point that you want to convey to the reader, the actual essence of the proposal, should really be wrapped up in the first 3 or 4 sentences. You want to really hit them between the eyes and convey what it is that you want to do. Okay, so be clear about your idea. That's what I'm saying. And in order to do that, you need to think, what is the topic? I don't mean the general area. I mean, what actually is the topic? I had somebody approach me last year that said, I really want to do a PhD. I want to do it in business studies because I'm based over in the Faculty of Business and Law. And then they weren't able to elaborate any further. And when I inquired about it, they said, well, any area of business will do. No, that's not the approach to take. So the first thing that you need to do is to really think about where your topic is going to be situated. I don't mean the general area. Think about it like an inverted triangle, right? So you've got your big area here, and you want to be coming down and making it very specific if you can. And the good way of thinking about this is to think about it as the mum test or the dad test or grandparent test, whatever it is. So are you able to describe your topic in 1 or 2 sentences in a way that your mum, your dad, your grandparent can understand. Okay, so in my particular case, I did research on levels of creativity in creative cities. So simple as that. Obviously, it was more complex than that, but you want to be able to describe it in a really simple way. In order to do that, I think you need to think about, well, that specific area, you want to get into the reader's head. Why should the reader be interested in that? Why should we care about that? And the answer to that is to do with the research gap. And you need to ask yourself, what is the topic and where does it fit into the research? Where does it fit into the current literature? I don't mean literature that you might put in your proposal that is from 20 years ago. Not interested in that. I'm interested, or anybody is interested in, what is the current thinking in that particular field? Where will it be located critically within that field? And this helps the reviewer to see the potential for originality, but also the research gap you're addressing, and hopefully there will be one. So if I can go through an example, and the first example is artificial intelligence. I'm going to use a few examples which hopefully will capture the breadth of interest that are online today. So the first example is artificial intelligence. Great example, this. So you can see where I've underlined there, mixed reality is a leading edge emerging audiovisual technology for creativity in the digital age. Nice introduction. And then we get to the very essence of it. Mixed reality superimposes digitally generated media into real-world environments. Mixed reality's potential in the arts is enormous, but as a technology in its infancy, it's still relatively unexplored, making it a priority. So the first thing is here is that the applicant is identifying with the reader that this is an untapped area. There hasn't been any research in this particular area, and then follows it up with, my perspective will make a pioneering contribution to the development of a nascent field, which is only beginning to be acknowledged with scant published research. So you can see there in the first, 3 sentences, we've already conveyed where this applicant is going to position their work. And if we go to another example, so let's now go to the example of transmedia. And in this particular example, which is practice-based, I love this example actually. So this practice-based PhD develops a 3-part interactive TV drama channeling Natalie Barney's queer literary circles through biographic, historical narrative media and cross-media practice processes and methods. So while Barney has produced some of the most poignant, significant feminist writings in French literature, so they're identifying there is literature there, this is the key bit. There has been no study that fully considers the impact of her literary salons and her key role in supporting female artists. So you can see there in those 2 examples that you've situated the topic within the literature. Now that is very important. So let's take the example, for example, of artificial intelligence. If we look up how many current papers there are in artificial intelligence, well, there's 3.2 million papers out there. And so it's really important, as I say, that you've got this inverted triangle that you're really pinpointing where your particular novelty will be. So exactly the same, if you go into literature, for example, and let's take the example of Virginia Woolf, then lots of people do work on Virginia Woolf, But given that there's already 500,000 academic papers out there on Virginia Woolf, you've got to make sure that your particular angle is novel. And it's the novelty that is particularly important for the PhD. And in my particular field, which is urban, but also cultural industries, you know, there's nearly 4 million academic papers that have been produced in this area in the last decade. So finding that particular novelty, that particular angle that you want to sell requires a lot of work. And I guess what I'm saying is make sure that you don't rush that. You've got to really think through the why and the what and the how to get the essence of that very clear. Now, in terms of thinking then, well, how do you do that? What do you present? And I think the big message that I would say to you, once you've thought about the research gap, is to think about the style that you're going to present. You need a clear structure, but most importantly, you need clear research questions. And so I want to talk a little bit about research questions. Some people use objectives, but I suggest that you use research questions and to write them as plainly as you can. The research questions will enable you to take what is quite a wide area, like the artificial intelligence, the Natalie Barney's work, the Virginia Woolf's, and to pinpoint the particular angle that you want to take. Don't go mad, don't do 10, 15 research questions. I would have thought for a proposal that three to four would be a really acceptable number. Don't go with 2 unless they're very specific things, that i.e. they're substantive things. But try and go for the 3 or 4. I think that is a really nice number. While you're doing that, adhere to the principles of keeping it simple. And I mean, keep it simple in the sense of plain English. Show clarity of thought and approach in those research questions, but write them as plainly as you can. A good rule of thumb, I always think, is to have no more than 20 words in a sentence. So try and keep to relatively short sentences. Use appropriate words. Think about the audience. Do you want to use lots of jargon? You may have to use technical words, but do you need to use lots of jargon? Are there other ways of doing that? Avoid lots of semicolons. Avoid lots of parentheses as well. Proofread. It sounds really simple. We all sometimes need to proofread our work before we hit the submit button, but you do need to think about that. Think about first impressions. The reader will form a first impression based on that first paragraph, but also the quality of your writing and the clarity and simplicity, but also the grammatical errors or the typos. That is going to really hit home. So be very, very careful that you proofread, but also that you get your message across in a concise way. Okay, so I think we've got some examples here of plain English. These are real examples, absolutely corkers this. So this first one, I'm saying get the logic across and get the thought process right, but do it in a concise way. So the very top of that box, we've got a brilliant example, and this came to me probably 2 months ago. So the proposal read, conceptualizing and researching hidden culture as an heretofore unknown and unused terminology requires a solid and robust theoretical framework which builds upon the work of other existing cultural scholarship to conduct research. I could barely say it without taking in a breath. 32 words there. Is it clear what it's getting across? No, I could read that to you 3 or 4 times and I don't think you would get a sense of what the author is trying to say. The sentence at the bottom is my attempt at trying to rewrite that actually. I think what the author of that is saying is, as an unknown area of research, hidden culture, which I've put in inverted commas there, draws on established theoretical frameworks to make novel advances. There you go, half the words, 17 words there, and it's a bit clearer. So I guess what I'm saying is be very, very careful about the way you're constructing the sentences. If I use another example of plain language here, and what I want to convey here is that it's not necessarily the field that you're operating, because I sometimes hear people say, well, I need to convey the technical meaning because of the field I'm in. No, not true. It should be perfectly possible for me, somebody like me, to pick up a proposal and understand it because of its plain English. And this is a really good example of this. So I can absolutely confirm that I know nothing about archaeology, and yet here I very much understand this proposal. So my project will be the first to investigate the significance of colour in Aegean Late Bronze Age glass and frescoes through scientific analysis of glass and pigments. Fantastic sentence. I understand totally what they're going to be doing. I will investigate the provenance of colorants and pigments from a range of domestic, ritual and burial contexts within the Mycenaean world. And in brackets, I know I said don't use them, but in brackets there, what they're saying is mainland Greece they're going to look at. That is a fantastic sentence. You do not have to be an expert in your area, but they've managed to convey there the absolute simplicity of what is needed. There's no mistaking about what that proposal is all about. So what I'm saying is be very, very careful about the way you construct all of this. Don't just write these rapidly and submit them. Think very carefully about what precisely it is that you want to do. Now, if you can, you will note from those the first two examples that we looked at, that the first one had identified the research gap as a novel, new to the world novelty. Nobody's looked at this ever before. And the second example that we used with transmedia talked about the fact that there was existing literature, but they were going to position it in a certain way. And I now want to go through a third example, which is international relations. So I've tried to spread these examples as widely as I can. So the project here, I've crossed some bits out because they're not terribly helpful, but the essence of this is the project will examine the relations of Cuba and Burkina Faso from the establishment of relations in 1975 through the critical revolutionary period of 1983 to 87 and into the present. So we know now where the area is that they want to look at and what the time period is. This is the clincher line. So the aim is to address this gap in our historical knowledge of Cuba's Africa policy during the Cold War period by shifting the focus to West Africa, which has featured little in academic assessments to date. So here they're positioning it very clearly about where they want to go with this. Now, the nice bit about this proposal is that they follow that up. So they have a broad aim. And they've now said, in carrying out the research, I want to answer the following questions. So what has motivated Cuban foreign policy towards the region? Can Cuban soft power be viewed in neo-Gramscian terms as of struggle against hegemonic order? And how significant is Burkina Faso as a model case in examining Cuba's foreign policy towards the region and the continent? So exactly as I've said, 3 questions there. And the thing that I want to point out here is, although they're not very detailed, those research questions, they're giving different ways in which you can look at the case study in different angles. So they're giving a hint to how they want to position this from the literature perspective. And the key thing is here with your research questions, they need very careful constructing of the questions. Keep them simple. Don't try and load too much into the question. That rule of plain English still applies in this case as well. So try and do that. And then the second example that I want to use, the next example, which is example number 4, where we're looking at cultural industries. You will see in this case, We don't need to worry too much about the start of it. It's going to look at cultural industries in Senegal and Morocco. The key bit is here, look towards the bottom of the screen. They've said objectives, which I'm not so keen on. I think questions are better. But the nice bit is here that they've fleshed out the questions, they've fleshed out the objectives. So in the last example, the questions were quite brief. And in this one, they've started to make them a bit bigger by thinking about what could be covered in those particular areas. Now, I'm just looking at the questions. A number of people have just asked about methodology, which I think is a fantastic question there. And I think I do want to say something about methodology here, because in the proposal, I think it would be really good after the research questions is to then detail a little bit about methodology. I think one of the things that is not impressive, what will make a good one stand out from a bad proposal, is it is a proposal that glosses over it, that says something like, I'm going to do primary research using mixed method approaches or using surveys. And the key thing is here, what the reader is looking at is the detail of the research questions, which will imply a certain approach and your knowledge of methodology. Nobody is expecting you to have a detailed understanding of research methodology, but they're perhaps looking for some level of preparedness there. They want to see that you've got an interest and an enthusiasm in research, but also that your research proposal is based on some experience and some understanding about what is involved. So you might want to convey at this point, if you've got knowledge of a certain area, that you want to, a knowledge of a certain type of method, you might say, I want to draw on that and expand it a bit further. Or if you're not sure what the methodology is, you might want to look at the types of people that are writing in your field of interest. Have a look at what their methods are, because it could be that your novelty is in the methods. Okay, so in my particular field, you may have somebody who's interested in creative or cultural industries in cities, and maybe that's being viewed from a certain perspective. And actually in your proposal, you're saying my addition, my contribution to the field is going to be to research it using an entirely different method. So that would be very interesting as well. I think the thing that you've got to be very careful about is if your question is suggesting, for example, that you want to really understand the behaviour, the perceptions of certain groups of people in your proposal, then clearly you need to be deploying interviews or phenomenological approaches in your research. If you're looking to test a pattern, so is this the case? Does A lead to B? That sort of approach. You clearly want to be using a more scientific or positivistic approach. You want to be testing that, and you might do that by collecting data and testing for patterns. So think very carefully. Do my research questions set out an ideal approach for doing a methodology? Methodology means the most suitable approach to doing research, and you've got to think there about the suitability. So I think then, in terms of your research focus, and you might have a heading that's called this actually, you need to think, is your research viable? Is it novel? We've talked a lot about novel. Does it add value? What is the point of this? What is the value in supporting it? You need to, of course, to do that by locating in critical debate, drawing on the very latest scholarship and the very latest ideas. And when I say latest, I mean in the last 12 to 24 months. I think, as I've said, you need to present that as research questions or possibly objectives, and with some knowledge of research methods. And to think about, is the research methodology appropriate for the questions? You might also at this point think about something like, rather than putting mixed methods, which really is a bit of a catch-all, you need to think, what is realistic? Think about, is the broad research methodology scientific? Is it interpretative? Or is it critical? And is the novelty, as I say, found in that methodology? I think that would also be a good point to think, are there ethical considerations to the research that you must take into account? If you're researching ISIS and you need to go out in the field, there are very clear safety ethical considerations to take into account. But equally, if you want to do some research on compliance in textiles, criminal activity, gangs, and so on, then there are also ethical considerations around safety. But ethics also applies to things like your positionality on something. So you've got to really think through the questions and think, is this proposal viable? Are there issues that are presented from doing that? Okay, so having done that, what else do you need to present? I think sometimes this is optional, but excuse me, I like to see skills as some sort of statement about skills and knowledge. I particularly like to see that where the reader, or sorry, rather the writer, is demonstrating an evolving body of work and skills. So if you've been a dancer and you've done lots of dance in your undergraduate and postgraduate phases, I would want to be talking about your particular skills, for example, in jazz or whatever that might be. So I think you might want to pass some comment about that. I think you might want to pass some comment if you've done a postgraduate dissertation, what you did in that, how the PhD might take that much further, in either by taking a slightly different route or using the research skills that you've practiced at postgraduate level and taking them in a slightly different way. I think you might want to talk about your profile and activity. Ask yourself, are you active in the field? Do you have preparedness? Are you somebody that is going to add value to that field? And in doing that, you might want to think about relevant internships, relevant part-time employment, even if it's a few years ago. Think about any writing that you've done, whether you've done blogs, whether you've done open source papers. Think about conference activity if you've been lucky enough to get involved in that. I think I would also like to see some sort of comment about your career aspirations, where the PhD fits into your plans. Is it possible, for example, for your PhD to open up doors in new ways? Will you be able to visit archives, get involved in scientific organisations or other cultural organisations or societies? Will it allow you to publish? And I think the more information you can put in that proposal that hints at that will be a really good thing, and it will help you to prepare for that proposal rather than rushing it through. Okay, so we might talk now about the submission. So we've talked about the different elements. You will have thought about these different elements and have got something quite firm in your head that you want to submit. I think a submission on a Word document, I think titles are good. I think subsections are good. So think about your title very carefully. Does it convey what you want to do? Don't overcomplicate it. Think about the plain English rule, and to convey, don't go for a title that's really long, but equally don't go for a title that is 3 or 4 words. You want something somewhere in between. Think about the research overview that we talked about right at the start. So those first 3 or 4 sentences that convey succinctly what you want to do. And then have a heading, a section that is about the research framework or focus. So in that, you might talk about the broader philosophical approach you're going to adopt, the questions, and the methodology. And that leads on to the research design. In the research design, you might talk in a bit more detail about what are the timeframes, what do you envisage happening at certain parts of your 3-year research. When will the field work take place? How will it be organised? Will there be separate phases of research field work that take place over certain periods? It's not always, the rule that in the first year you do literature, second year field work, third year or beyond, the writing up phase. Research doesn't always fit nicely into those structures. And although it's a rule of thumb that you can organise it that way, think about what is going to be most appropriate for you. Think about your career development and also place that into your proposal. If there are placements that you want to do as part of that process or opportunities that you want to get involved in, detail it there at the same time. Now, Adam, I think I've spoken for quite a long while. So what I'm thinking is that we might go to some of the questions, if that's okay. So let me have a quick look at some of the questions, because I want to really use this as a session for people to get across any issues that they've got. Okay, so I want to do a PhD, but I don't know where to start. Well, start by making a cup of tea and having a big think about this. So first thing to start is people sometimes rush into this and think PhD is a natural progression. It's not necessarily. So you want to have a proper think about this. I think there was some research that was published by the UK government last year that said something like only 33% of PhD students in the UK go and work in university. So this idea that you do a PhD to go and work in university is only partially true. So you need to think, why do I need a PhD? Do I need it for career progression? Or am I doing it because I'm really enthused about the subject and I want to refine my skills? All of those are valid reasons, by the way. But I think as part of that process, you will start to identify a research problem, because you'll start to think about whether it's a skills-based thing or whether it's a topic or career-based thing. And that'll help you to start, as I say, this inverted triangle. It will start to help you to get down to the crux of it right at the bottom, the refining of it. So what advice for then identifying that research problem? Pick your area, move down, think about a skill area or think about a particular subtopic that you enjoyed working on. Think about a particular skill that you want to refine and start reading around that. Think about, use Google Scholar, for example. Have a look at what's out there. Start reading. And Google Scholar is really nice because on the left-hand side of the screen, you've got the articles, and on the right-hand side, it will tell you if you can get access to them. If you can't get access, by the way, go to things like their web pages. You'll often find that people list papers there on their departmental web pages or on things like academia.edu that are not usually available by going through publishers. So it's not true that you have to have sophisticated membership of libraries to get to look at the field that you're interested in. Having looked at the field, have a little look and see if you can start to spot where the approaches are in the field. First thing to do is to identify who the current leaders in the field are, and then have a little think and think, well, how do these different leaders differentiate? What is their angle? Do they have different angles? And then you will get a sense of where you might be able to find a research gap or where you've got a contribution it would be nice to make. Okay, so that's the first thing that you can do. And I'm seeing a couple of questions that are about, well, how much detail do you need? Quite a lot. We're not looking for a big essay, but we are looking for a sense that you understand the field that you're proposing to us, you want to become an expert in. Okay, and whilst we're not expecting you at the start of the PhD to be experts, we are expecting some enthusiasm and some preparedness to go into that field. So some realism. We don't want to accept you if you're not realistic about the PhD. Okay, so this is quite a serious endeavour. So my answer to that would be yes, you do need quite a lot of detail, but I think unlike at postgraduate level where you're writing these detailed essays, what we're looking for are your skills to analyse what's in the field, to synthesise it, and to synthesize it really succinctly. So the main comments that are made in the presentation about plain English and nice, concise sentences is absolutely key here. So can you synthesize what the field is saying into some really concise sentences so that you can position your work around that? I think that is a very good place to start. I think an attempt to try and convey that into research questions is helpful. We know that those research questions will be refined as you go through the process, and that is what the job of the student plus supervisory team is all about. Adam, are there any other questions that are appearing in the chat?
Yeah, I mean, before we move that, I'll just quickly add on, give you a little breather there, Rachel, give you a little break over the talking. I mean, I think crucially, going back to the advice and the details questions, the big tip I would give prospective applicants is make sure you're in contact with your supervisors before you finish that proposal. One of your, you've got to find it. It's your project. You've got to own it. You've got to develop it. You've got to be passionate about it for whatever reason. And I think Rachel's listed some key reasons as to why you want to go do a PhD. But enter into a dialogue as soon as you can with a prospective supervisor or supervisory team. You can help. You can say, I've found these areas. I think this is the direction I want to go. And they, in their role and as a good supervisory team, will say, look, that's a good point. But actually, have you thought about this area? This might help you push that on. There's some detail missing here. If you want to take this methodological approach, you might need to think about how this links up to this particular question and particular objective. So that initial dialogue in developing a research proposal, and I'd say, and I'm sure Rachel shares this view, my experience of looking at research proposals is the ones where there's been a dialogue with supervisors beforehand are just a step better. That initial dialogue, getting that critical lens, taking that feedback, taking on board those suggestions as to how to improve it, is absolutely key into just taking that research proposal up that extra level. I would say as well, the research proposal isn't something you're tied to when you submit it. This isn't a contract. You're not sending us a contract of the research you're going to do. But what we want to see in a proposal is that you've thought about what you're going to try and do. And there's a rationale behind what you want to try and do. Then as the project evolves, we expect there to be change. So whilst we say detail, whilst we say identifying that research problem, that research gap, there will be scope to develop that and move it in a direction as you go into the process as well.
I think that's an absolutely fantastic point, because at the end of the day, we get inquiries from all around the world for people to come and study here. What we're really interested in are reflexive practitioners, because we want you to become reflexive practitioners when you leave De Montfort University and go into the world of work. And nowhere better than understanding that the PhD, yes, it is an individual process and you take individual ownership of that, but it's not. It's a reflexive process. You're absorbing everything that you're immersed to, and you're taking that on board and refining your thinking and refining your approach as you're going along. So absolutely, we're not expecting anything that's perfect at the start. And I think all of us would admit that our first draft of something is a long way short of what the final draft is. It doesn't matter how senior you are, that is still the case. So don't submit that first draft. I think, as Adam is saying, make sure that you're having a dialogue with your the supervisory team, hopefully a supervisory team, but certainly colleagues in the department you want to go to, hopefully go to, and make sure that you submit or at least draft 3 or 4. Okay, I think that would be pretty good advice.
There's a question that's come up in the chat, Rachel, I think sort of builds on what you're talking about there, about that reflexive practitioner here. This idea, what academic expertise do you need to enter into a PhD program? I think that's a really interesting question, particularly when we look across the different faculties as well.
Well, I think, you know, a taught postgraduate, so by that I mean a master's or an MRes would be a fantastic preparation for going into PhD study, because it's a route in which you have engaged with some of the critical literature, you've started to develop your research skills, and that's an obvious entry point. So I think where that applies to you, you can draw on that and demonstrate to the reader that you've got those skills. That isn't the case for everybody, and that's okay. So for some people, the issue will be an equivalence. So what is the equivalent to master's study? And I think particularly for those students that are perhaps they haven't done their degree, their first degree was 20 years ago, or maybe more, and they're coming back into this, you might want to reflect on what you learned 20 years ago, but then think about what you've been doing since then. I think particularly for practice-based PhDs, there will be an equivalence from having been a practitioner in the field. So I think we would want to find out in that proposal what practice experience you've had and what experience you can draw from other fields of life that is equivalent to that taught postgraduate, or the postgraduate level anyway.
And I'd add to that as well that within the institution and across the faculty, we do offer different pathways to the PhD beyond just the traditional PhD route. There's the PhD by extended professional practice, which is available and it's targeted specifically at those of you who may be practitioners with extensive experience within your field. And within the Faculty of Business and Law, we have the Doctor of Business Administration, which again is aimed at business executives looking to do level 8 doctoral studies. So there are options available beyond the traditional routes, and I think, as well as Rachel says, that experience within the fields, particularly in more applied disciplines and practice-based disciplines, I think is really valuable. And again, discuss it with a potential supervisory team, because they will know the field well. They will know what kind of expertise and experience plays well within their particular field. So reach out, I think, is a key message that I would always stress to PhD applicants. Is start to reach out to prospective supervisors and experts in the field to get these questions answered.
And you might pick certain academics or hopefully supervisors that are going to work with you based on their own experience, and maybe the work that they've published or the particular approaches that they've adopted. So think about that. And I keep coming back to this methodology bit. Whilst I don't want to panic people, because I know that people might listen to this and think, oh, I'm not sure about the methodology. Don't get too hung up on this. I think what we're looking for is a sense that you're able to link your research questions, which are really just the point of inquiry into your research, with a suitable approach. So we're looking for something that's more than one sentence that says, I want to do survey research on whatever it is. And we're looking for you to break that down and maybe have some commentary on how you envisage that working. So do I want to do diaries? Do I want to look at objects or visuals, or do I want to talk to people? And I think the crucial bit there is why. You may not have all of the technical language in your head at the moment, but I think somebody that's got a good sense of what approach they want to take, because they want to get at the truth. The PhD is really just about getting at the truth and adding something to a field, your epistemology. You want to have a little bit of a sense of how you're going to get at that truth and why. You know, I want to really understand something from a person's point of view, so therefore I'd like to do some interviews that do this. You know, and it will depend on the different angles. So I think some common sense that you've got things linked and they're synchronous would be absolutely perfect. So I think no more than a paragraph, but certainly more than one sentence.
And yeah, just to add to this, just to follow up on this point, I think how do you know who to reach out to? I mean, first of all, if you know the topic area you're looking at, look for those academics who are working in that area. If it's quite broad, what I'd recommend, and I'm going to have it posted in the chat in a moment, is look at our research institutes at DMU. Each of our research institutes has an institute head of research students who you can contact directly. Their emails will be on the website pages. They will then be able to direct you to a specific supervisor, or you can arrange to have a chat with them one-to-one. You can also reach out to our faculty heads of research students. Again, each faculty has one. I'm the one for business and law. And you can get, again, our email addresses are available and should be made available through the communications you've had here. So I would say reach out, yeah, if you find the institutes, the area you're interested in, and then people will help you reach out to different colleagues. If you can't find those emails, contact the doctoral college and they will push your email in one of our directions, and we're always happy to have a chat. There are opportunities for one-to-one sessions with the faculty heads of research students across the 4 faculties throughout the day. If you go back to that stream link, the email invitation that you'll have received, there's an opportunity to book a one-to-one. It might be too late to squeeze one in now, but that email will be passed on to the relevant faculty head of research students, and we can happily arrange an opportunity to chat after today's event. So it's not a silly question, it's a very important question, but do have a look at those links that have been posted in the chat. And thanks a lot for your questions. And we do have to wrap up now. We've reached the end of this session. I want to say a huge thank you to Rachel for the insights, really useful advice for those of you as you start to develop and refine your research proposals. And again, I look forward to seeing some of you later on in the one-to-one sessions, and I hope you enjoy the rest of today. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.